everyone, and welcome once again to Ask the Treksperts, the show where we answer your questions about Star Trek. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Sarah.
And today, in anticipation of the new Star Trek film, we're going to be talking about Space Seed. And pretty soon, we are also going to be doing a commentary on Wrath of Khan. We did a commentary on motion picture somewhat recently. And so we thought we'd knock all the Khan stuff out of the way before Star Trek Into Darkness comes out, because more and more it's seeming like Benedict Cumberbatch is probably playing a character who we will find out later in the film is actually Khan. We'll see if all that turns out the way that a lot of fans are starting to think that it is with all the trailers we've seen and things like that. But anyway, even if it turns out that somehow or rather we're all off base, and I'm pretty sure we're not, and there's been talk that certain people involved in the project have accidentally leaked that it's Khan. I don't think they had to. but anyway, might as well knock the Khan stuff out anyway.
Because Khan is awesome.
Yeah, because Khan is awesome. So today, Space Seed.
Actually, Ricardo Montalban is awesome.
And you know, I want to start there. I don't think that, and we talked about this when we were watching it, I don't know that Khan would have become anything like as popular a character if he'd been played by a different actor.
Yeah, that guy is awesome. Anything he's in is great, and Khan is no exception.
And he's surprisingly consistent between the two places that you see Khan. Keep in mind that there's 20 years between those two things.
Yeah.
Nearly. Well, not quite, but I mean, there's 16, 17 years between those. And that's remarkable because, I mean, he looks very different by the time you get to Wrath of Khan.
Yes.
Partly what's kind of fun about that, too, is that even though, you know, Ricardo Montalban clearly has aged quite a bit, also, he would look pretty ragged. Not to say that just Ricardo Montalban looks ragged, but, you know, he would look different.
Right. Well, he's spent so many years on a wasted planet that's hard to survive on.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. I also thought it was really neat that the end of the episode invokes Milton, because Milton is all over Wrath of Khan.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I like that a lot of the ideas that were planted in Space Seed
that were, perhaps we could say seeded.
Yes. Are brought to fruition in Wrath of Khan.
That's right.
Yeah.
And
especially
I thought that was neat.
A lot of the old book references. And I think that, I can't remember the director's name who directed Wrath of Khan, but he definitely built on that and said, oh, well, if we're going to reference Paradise Lost, let's bring out all these other great old classic, Western classics and pull from them as well.
Yeah, it's something I always forget about, and then I'm surprised by again whenever I watch Space Seed, where I'm like, oh yeah, he said Milton. And I really kind of like how Khan and Kirk have a language in that episode. They have an unspoken language. These are two men who understand each other.
Well, Kirk is a soldier, not a diplomat. So,
precisely.
So they're really kind of two opposing generals. And
he's a strategist.
Exactly. And what this episode actually reminded me of this time is that first Romulan episode.
Balance of Terror.
Balance of Terror.
Yes.
It seems like Khan and Kirk played off of each other the same exact way that Kirk and the Romulan commander played off of each other during that.
And then when you get to Wrath of Khan, the structure is similar in that we've got these two, powerhouse commanders who are never on screen together, who are enemies throughout the entire episode.
And they're constantly playing a game of cat and mouse.
That's right.
Trying to outsmart the other. And I think that's really what worked. That's what worked about Balance of Terror, and that's really what works on the big screen with Wrath of Khan, is just that dynamic. Where you have two brilliant minds who are strategizing against each other, and it doesn't feel like you have to make one stupid for the other to outsmart the other.
Wrath of Khan makes Space Seed very difficult to look at critically for me, because I don't know what Space Seed would be without it. I don't remember Space Seed without Wrath of Khan, because of course, in my lifetime they've both existed.
Yeah.
And so
I saw Wrath of Khan before I saw Space Seed.
I think a lot of people did, sure.
Yeah.
Likely I did. I don't remember. Star Trek's always been in my life. I don't remember which one I saw first. But I can't think about Space Seed without thinking about Wrath of Khan. And Wrath of Khan and Space Seed almost doesn't feel like its own episode because of Wrath of Khan, in my mind. Despite the fact that there are some discrepancies between them, there are places where I'm watching Space Seed and thinking, this is an okay story on its own, but it's very much a setup for something greater.
Yeah.
Not that it knew it at the time.
No, absolutely not. And I think it leaves itself wide open for there to be a sequel, which is nice because then Wrath of Khan pulls from material that you're you wish you could go back, like Kirk or Spock says, in 100 years and see what has happened to this colony.
That's another line I really appreciate for the sake of Wrath of Khan, because you get the sense from Spock saying that line that they had no intention of checking up on them. That the whole point was Khan is a super being, basically. They call him a Superman, and he has 5 times human strength and that sort of thing. Regardless of the fact that they can't really show you that on the small budget that they have.
Yeah.
And you get the idea from Spock's line at the end. If we could, what would it be like if we came back in 100 years? That they would almost be maybe, and maybe I'm projecting, but like they would almost be afraid to go back there.
The Federation or Starfleet.
Sure,
yeah.
Because this is a guy who, especially with the rest of his cronies, who are also advanced human beings, could probably take over the Federation on their own.
Oh, absolutely. Give them one starship, and they're everywhere.
And I know it's funny to compare these things, but if Mirror Archer could do it with a ship from a couple hundred years in the future, surely Khan could do it just with his intellect.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I never... It's interesting that at the beginning of Wrath of Khan, the whole premise is set up on, Kirk never checked up on me to see how I was doing. Well, at the end of Space Seed, it's pretty obviously that wasn't in the plan.
And it seems evident that, not that Khan hears that line from Spock, but I'm not getting it just from that. Khan wants a place to rule.
Right.
And, of course, the whole point about Milton, and again... going back to my point from earlier, which I never quite finished, the idea that after Khan leaves, for the audience's benefit, through Scotty, who says, I'm not up on Milton, they go ahead and say the famous quote, it's better to rule in hell than to serve in heaven. But Kirk and Khan don't have to spell it out. They don't have to give us that exposition because they both know.
Yeah.
And so Khan just says, have you read the works of Milton? Kirk says, I understand.
Yeah.
And I really, really love that. And so, I get the feeling that from that exchange, Khan not only wouldn't expect them to come back, but I don't think he would want them to.
Yeah, he would feel like he was subservient to somebody having to check up on him.
And he has the opportunity here to do something that very few people in history have ever had the opportunity to do, which is to begin a society from scratch with absolutely not just no oversight, but no one even knowing about them.
Yeah.
Or knowing about them enough that they would come back. I mean, naturally, Kirk's not going to leave this out of his log. And I get the sense that Kirk doesn't even feel like he is outside of his jurisdiction in solving this way.
Although
it makes me think that it makes me think that his jurisdiction goes farther than I thought it would have. I'm surprised that Kirk on his own without contacting, and again, I'm projecting again somewhat from what I know from later series. Yeah. Picard would have done that. Picard would have contacted Starfleet first before he stranded some people on a planet somewhere.
But the thing is, back in Kirk's day, this is what I was going to say.
Sure.
Colonists were going out willy-nilly, not contacting Starfleet, and just setting up a colony on a planet, and they're on their own. And it's like, Khan taming a world. There are these colonists who, like the early settlers to America...
They're not doing it with permission. They've not talked to Starfleet first.
They just
left the
set out on
planet
their own
and found another one.
Exactly. They create their own, colony, and it spreads across the planet. And in TNG, the Federation has a little bit more oversight.
Yeah,
but
sure.
You notice that Picard...
They're a little more militaristic, ironically.
They come up on colonies all the time that were settled 100 years ago, and either no one knew that they were there, or no one knew what had become of them. And so it seems like in Picard's day, that kind of thing wasn't going on as much, but in Kirk's day it was going on all the time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I never really thought about it like that. I had a different experience with Space Seed this time, and I feel like maybe you did too. Because I said that it's difficult to watch Space Seed without thinking about Wrath of Khan, but I've also been thinking about Wrath of Khan a little bit more lately than usual because of all the speculation about darkness. And so I really had it in my head this time, and I was really paying attention to those sorts of things. And it was really interesting that some of those lines at the end, it never really hit me. Especially the Milton thing. I'd not really thought about that hard. But I was like, oh, that's kind of of neat. They didn't just go back and rewatch this. I mean, like, they took an idea and they ran with it.
Yeah.
Now, the question, of course, is, do some of those things make Wrath of Khan really inconsistent with that episode? And I don't want to get into that real hard here. I think that's something that you and I should explore when we do our commentary.
Yeah.
But I want to put it on everybody's back burner if you're planning on staying with us through this, because you and I have been talking about that a little bit, and aren't there maybe a few things, stuff like, you had mentioned, and this was great that you thought of this, Botany Bay.
Yeah. When Khan takes over the ship, it looks like he just lets Botany Bay go.
When you get to the end, it's not there anymore.
Yeah, it's out in space. It's floating. It's space debris.
Or at least that's the assumption, unless they sent it down first. But that seems unlikely, because the thing is, we saw, if I'm not mistaken, we saw a shot of the Enterprise without Botany Bay before Kirk made his deal with Khan.
Yeah,
so they couldn't have sent it down to the planet first. Our point is, in Wrath of Khan, the Botany Bay is on Ceti Alpha 5.
Yeah.
And Khan and his people used the scraps from it for shelter and to help them survive. And in Space Seed, there doesn't seem to be any evidence that the Botany Bay is still with the ship at the point that they beam them down.
Yeah.
So I'd never thought about that before.
Yeah, and it's almost, why would they send them down in Botany Bay? Would that be a craft that would be landable? Because not all spacecraft are.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Would they even think to do that, or would they send them down with their standard colonist packets, survival kits or whatever, and say okay, and then take the Botany Bay back to a Starfleet History Museum or something?
Yeah, that's a great point. Let's go ahead and get off of Wrath of Khan for a second, and like I said, we found some discrepancies. We're going to talk about those when we get to Wrath of Khan in our commentary, because that'll fuel our conversation and give us more to talk about. When you've got to talk for 2 hours. So let's go to the questions about whether or not, and again, this is from a conversation Sarah and I had before this, about whether or not the whole premise of, as much as I like it, and I'm not dogging the episode for doing this, but it's a little confusing, whether or not the whole eugenics thing even really makes sense given the dates that they give us. Go ahead.
Well, one of the problems with the way, they set it up so that the eugenic wars are in 1990s.
1996, in fact, is when Khan
30 years,
went on the Botany Bay.
So pretty much 30 years after
from the taping of the episode, if that makes any sense. So we're talking 1996 is in the future. You got to put yourself back into 66. This would have been 67, really. I think so. You got to put yourself back into the time that the show was made. This is the future as from the perspective of people living in the 60s.
Right. And so their assumption,
the eugenics war, which by the way this episode claims is also World War III, that they're the same thing. You get the idea in TNG and in First Contact especially that maybe they're not the same thing.
Where one happened before the other.
And that's always the idea I got. Another thing I was surprised to hear and had forgotten about, that Spock says the third of your world wars, or however it is he words it.
Yeah.
And so anyway, apparently the eugenics wars and World War III, according to this, are the same thing. And maybe that's not a huge discrepancy. It makes sense that would lead into World War III, and so then you've got that only 30 years after, and we've got selective breeding.
Yeah, well, and the problem is that 30 years after, you have the product of selective breeding.
Precisely.
And, you had selective breeding in the 60s.
Okay.
And so I guess the idea, it's not so much a problem with this episode as it is with The Wrath of Khan, I would say.
Oh, I see.
Because in the 60s, you had selective breeding. You had the ability to do it. And so if the assumption was that some group of scientists at that moment were working on selectively breeding humans, breeding them for their strength and intellect, etc.
It wouldn't have to be prevalent or in the news all the time.
No, and it probably would be some underground
secretive
scientists, secret lab, secret government, whatever. It's science fiction.
Well, and we know, according to Assignment Earth, that there were secret sciencey things going on where science was better in the 60s than anybody thought it was.
Yeah, so the idea would be that when the episode was made, 1966, 67, Khan would have been probably born or just about to be born. And so by the time 1997 came around, he would be the dictator and running around with all these Supermen.
Yeah.
The problem is with Wrath of Khan...
Again, 96, because that's the time that they went into space. But anyway.
In Wrath of Khan, they change it. It's no longer selective breeding. It's genetic engineering. Which is different.
Okay, I gotcha.
And there was no...
And they play it up as very different.
Yeah, well, it's genetic manipulation. It's not...
I thought your problem was even selective breeding in the 60s.
No, because you've had selective breeding among animals since the dawn of time, where you take, two sheep who are the strongest ones, and you keep those for the reproduction, and suddenly you have stronger sheep, or thicker wool, or whatever you're going for.
Maybe we should have looked this up. What is, then, the definition of eugenics?
Well, it's just gearing humanity towards it's taking humans and trying to create a better species of humans.
Yeah.
So you root out all the undesirable humans, all of the...
So we're talking about two methods of the same thing.
Exactly.
And so you can still use that word.
Right. It's still eugenics. It's still trying to... Hitler was trying to create a race of supermen.
Right.
I mean, he was, he did away with all the handicapped people, all the people he found undesirable, and so he was trying to create this race of supermen, and eugenics was huge in the 1930s.
So just extrapolating, we could almost make the assumption, and again, I might be reaching, but we could almost make the assumption that according to Spacey, before it gets changed in Wrath of Khan, I didn't realize we were going back to Wrath of Khan with this. I thought your deal was even with selective breeding.
No,
what I was going to say is, what if the idea would have been, they don't go into this, that Khan and his people are products of selective breeding, and then the eugenics wars are them not only taking over, but then maybe doing genetic engineering themselves. I could almost see that.
I could see that.
It's not there. I'm not saying it's there.
But
so what we're basically saying at that point is that the eugenics wars were not a war as we're told in TNG forward. They're not. This is interesting. They're not, according to this episode, a war about genetic engineering and about trying to make man better. They're about men that were made better taking over.
Yeah, and
it's a totally different thing.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah, exactly. It's the people who are the product of selective breeding.
Saying we're better than you, so we should take over.
Exactly, and Khan pretty much says that.
Because Khan's not.
Episode.
So I'm wrong. Khan's not trying to make better men. He's saying I am a better man. Why shouldn't I lead everybody? I'm Napoleon. And he keeps calling himself.
And the thing is that if he were to mate with,
or not Napoleon, but he keeps calling it all of those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, but if he were to mate with another superwoman, they would produce super kids, and so they don't.
I have this mental image now.
They don't have to worry about genetic manipulation. The genetic manipulation has already happened, but it's happened by a different method than is implied in Wrath of Khan.
Now the question is, could selective breeding? I'm just asking because I wouldn't know. Could selective breeding in only one generation create somebody who is 5 times stronger and that much smarter? That doesn't make sense.
No. I would say that.
So maybe they changed it to genetic engineering because that makes more sense.
No, they changed it because genetic engineering was the big thing in the 80s. Into the 90s, especially.
Well done. You're absolutely right, yeah.
So what happened is genetic engineering did not happen, did not exist in the 60s.
No, I know it didn't.
And so they wouldn't have even thought of it.
So they wouldn't have thought of it.
And so the problem
is... I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure there wasn't science fiction about genetic engineering in the 60s.
No, of course not. But the problem is that in order to
that wouldn't make sense, because people in the 60s would have had to have been doing it.
Yeah, but in order to have the eugenic wars then, you would have had genetic engineering in the 60s to create Khan, to give birth to him, have him grow up.
Yeah.
And so I could see, if they had set Wrath of Khan if they had set the eugenics wars in, say, a century later, say, instead of 1996, say 2096, then that would have made sense, because then you could say, okay, well, they didn't have genetic engineering in the 60s, or they weren't selectively breeding yet, but they were starting on it.
And just
you have
like
100 years to get it to work.
Just
out.
like so many of the best TOS episodes, we've got a show that's trying to be about something that is a concern now, and so then because you used the same premise in the 80s, you've got a different concern.
Right.
So
it's not a problem per se. It's just a little bit of a hole.
It's a little. Well, it's not just a hole. It's a bit far-fetched.
It's far-fetched because Khan
one generation
had been born in the 60s.
In the 60s.
Based on genetic engineering, which didn't exist as a technology.
Yeah.
Or
even if it was by selective breeding, he couldn't have been as powerful as he was.
Yeah, well, but I think the thought in the 60s was that that would have been going on, if they even thought of this,
that it had been going on for
a while.
Okay.
And then finally you reach this apex of humanity, Khan. I don't know.
So we're doing a lot of speculating about the science and things like that, which we don't usually do, but it's kind of interesting, and talking about the philosophy and stuff like that. So let's jump briefly into a little bit of plot stuff, just to actually talk about the episode. And we're kind of assuming that you've seen Space Seed. It's kind of a major episode.
If you haven't, you should.
And so anyway,
awesome.
Yeah, that's how we were approaching this. But of course. The Enterprise comes upon the Botany Bay. They go, oh man, that's a ship from 1996. What? And then they go and they get Khan, but Khan intelligently doesn't tell them who he is right away. And as time goes on, they figure out who he is. The big mistake I think that Kirk and Spock make is that they allow McCoy to give him tapes that show him how the Enterprise works.
Well, they give him access to basically the library tapes, all the library computer tapes. So.
See, and that wouldn't have been so bad if that's standard procedure, where just these are things we usually let people have because we don't know.
But they did.
But what bothers me about it is that they know precisely what he's going to do with it.
Yeah.
If he just said, oh, I'd like some reading, and they said, okay, we're going to give you access to this database, okay, fine. That's not going to have anything classified on it, but when you've got a guy that you already know is a product of selective breeding, because they know that at that point. They don't know he's Khan Noonien Singh. They find that out later.
Yeah.
But they know that by process of elimination, here are some people that in the library computer we found out were sent off into space. There were only like 30 of them. This guy's got to be one
70.
of them. Or however, I forget. Yeah. But they know. Well, actually, there were more than that. There were 72 that were taken out, but there were others that died.
Yeah, 12
so there were
died.
even more than that. Yeah. Good point. They say, okay, there's this certain number of people that were unaccounted for. This must be them. They already know that. So they've got to be a little suspicious of him. And then he very. I mean, I said he's intelligent. I mean that he acts intelligently. He doesn't tell them exactly who he is. Khan. There's probably a lot of people named that.
Yeah.
At least is the idea, I guess. But then when he says, "Hey, I'd like to learn a bunch about what your ship looks like. I'd like schematics of your ship. Light bulbs ought to be going on. Ought to be going off." He says that.
Does he?
Yeah, he comes right out and says it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He says, I'd like to study up on the schematics of your starship, the inner workings. And McCoy answers
I don't think
with
he says schematics though.
I forget what he says, but.
Yeah.
He almost says, he might as well have said schematics the way he puts it. I forget exactly what the line is, but he says I'd like to study your ship, and then McCoy says, oh yeah, you've got 200 years of catching up to do.
Yeah.
Or however long it is.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so which is interesting because I've heard a lot of people say that until TNG or until the movies maybe we had this sense that TOS was much further in the future. Space Seed we get
exactly 200.
Yeah.
What the way I've heard it is that the series Bible said it was somewhere between 200 and 900 years in the future. It was unspecified, but it was somewhere around there.
And I think this is the episode that we went back to when we decided exactly what time it was.
Yeah, I think so.
Is the idea I get. But here's the other thing that's silly about McCoy. I said it's a problem with Kirk and Spock. It kind of is. But also, McCoy does this after Khan had a knife to his throat.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, like, they lose their ship to Khan, and he's not real shifty about it even. You know what I mean? Like he's not real calculating about it. He kind of telegraphs it. I mean, he comes right out, I want to know everything I can about your ship. And if there was no reason to be suspicious of him, okay.
Yeah.
But you've got about 3 reasons to kind of be scared of this guy. That's all I'm saying.
Oh, absolutely. But I don't think
that's one of my biggest problems with the episode.
Because Khan says to Kirk that he wants to, read some stuff about the ship.
Right.
And Kirk says, well, these library tapes are available to all the patients.
Yeah, right.
So McCoy can show you how to use them. So I don't think it's that big of a
I would have
thing.
made things less available after he had a knife to my doctor's throat. But
Yeah,
but also McCoy doesn't tell Kirk about that.
No, he doesn't, and
And-
I'm sure that happens a lot with people who are confused and don't know where they are.
That's a really good point too. Sure, that is maybe one of, if not my favorite McCoy scenes in all of Star Trek. The way that he's, I mean, like, I love how Khan's like I like a brave man, because McCoy says if either slit my throat or something else and be done with it, and then he tells him the exact artery to cut to make it most efficient.
Yeah.
That's a great scene.
It is.
Great scene.
Yeah.
Worth the whole episode. What do you think of Marla MacGyver's?
I'm always conflicted about her.
Okay.
Just because I think it's kind of, I think it's kind of weird that being a Starfleet officer, she just falls for Khan immediately.
Huh?
On the other hand, I love how Khan manipulates her.
I do too.
And I can also kind of see what she sees in Khan.
It's definitely a very 60s view of women.
Yeah.
You know, we do have that where the episode doesn't treat it as strangely as we would think of it now, that he's treating her so differently as he does everybody else on the ship.
Yeah.
And yes, he's manipulating her, and yes, he's picking up on the fact that she's so enamored with him because she sees him as this amazing relic that is, you know, now alive again in the prime of his life, and she's so taken with him she doesn't know what to do.
And I think more than that, because she's enamored with the great men of history.
Yes.
So if say, Alexander the Great were suddenly to come off the pages of history.
Right, and they mentioned Harrison, and
Yeah, I mean, she automatically has this connection of, this is the kind of man I've studied and have painted all over my quarters.
And she was starting a picture of him. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of thing where surely this is the kind of man she's dreamed about, getting with.
That's
getting
right.
together with.
That's right.
So, of course, suddenly he's there, and what can she do?
Well, yeah, exactly. And very, very quickly, he brings her on his side to mutiny. And all of the intrigue there is really good. I think that how he manages to take over in the first place is a little easy. But what's really interesting with the inner workings of a starship like that is that if you can get to the transporter room, all you need is one person.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
At least if you happen to have a ship next door with 72 other people that can help you, other people who are 5 times stronger than human beings, who can help you.
Yeah.
But anyway, did you have anything else to add? Because I think we kind of covered most of it.
I think we did. I think it's a great episode. And,
yeah, I think it is too.
Really well made, really well put together, and the dialogue it's just throughout the episode is fantastic. Everyone's acting performance is great.
It says a lot about Montalban's performance that it became. I mean, it spawned off a sequel that was the biggest Star Trek film, and that's kind of in science fiction canon, and everyone remembers fondly. And also that this is a character that only appears twice in Star Trek, and everybody knows who he is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, most people would credit Wrath of Khan more for that, but you had to have one before you could have the other.
Exactly.
And keep in mind that this is a character that Montalban created first. He didn't reinvent him for Wrath of Khan. He's the same guy. He's very much the same guy. He's different and it's a layered performance in Wrath of Khan. He's different because he would be different.
Yeah.
With going through what he went through and losing his wife and going through almost the destruction of a planet and trying to figure out how to survive. It was already hard enough to survive.
Yeah.
And then to survive on a world that became barren because another planet next door blew up or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, so anyway, I don't know. I think a lot of the credit has to go to Montalban. The ideas are great.
Yeah.
But somebody's got to sell them.
Yeah.
And it
sell him, he did.
Yeah, he really did. And that's not to say that he's the only great villain in TOS, because he's not. And there are other wonderful, wonderful actors in TOS, certainly, who played antagonists. But I wonder if TOS, on the other hand, if more of their guest stars had been to Montalban's caliber, I wonder if more of those characters might have been remembered differently.
Yeah.
That's not to say that he's the only one. I'm just saying that there are others that maybe that maybe were, And then you've also got script things too, right? Like I love Lord Garth, but nobody's going to want to make a movie with Lord Garth.
No, I want to make a movie with Lord Garth.
You might, but no one who would make a movie would want to make one with Lord Garth.
I think every actor in Hollywood want to play Lord Garth.
And then there's other characters that I could see them wanting to make movies of just for ideas that were never really executed well, and now you might as well execute them, like Colonel Green and characters like that.
Apollo. Okay.
Apollo. Well, on that note. Are we going to rate Space Seed?
Do we have to?
I guess. Go ahead.
4?
I'm torn between a 3.5 and a 4, and I'm not sure where I'm going with it, because it's definitely in my top 15. I don't know if it's even in my top 10. Just of favorites.
Yeah.
It's
There's
tough.
so many favorites.
Because there's others I have a little bit more fun with. I think that this episode is somewhat... There are places that are meant to make us uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And it succeeds at that. Yeah. So it's hard to put on my fun list. On top of other ones.
But it's great.
It's one of the darker episodes, which is great, you know, and it's really good at that. I think, honestly, thematically, it's even in places a little bit darker, may I say, than Mirror Mirror, even.
Sure.
In places. Mirror Mirror is also kind of a big idea that's hard to get your mind around in the you know, scary... There's no torture in this episode.
No.
You know, stuff like that. But anyway, I'm getting off track. The thing is, like I said earlier, let me swing this back to where I was at the beginning. I have a hard time looking at this outside of Wrath of Khan. Do I like it? Because would I like it the way I like it if Wrath of Khan had never been made? I don't know, and that makes me juggle between a 3.5 and a 4.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I guess I'm gonna go to 3.5 just because there are a couple of things where I feel like, well, that was an easy writing thing where you could have made our characters a little bit smarter in dealing with Khan, and then it would have made Khan taking over the ship a little bit more impressive than it was, given that he's the superior intellect. And by the way, that's one of the most memorable lines in all of Star Trek. Superior intellect breeds superior ambition.
Yeah.
That's not that Star Trek made it up, but it's there, and it's memorable, and it permeates, and I think that it's one of those lines that's right up there with the needs of the many, and that's right up there with infinite diversity and stuff like that. So
yeah,
you know, it's a truth.
Yeah.
So or a potential truth.
Yes.
You know, sure. It's a debatable truth, maybe. Well, I know debatable truth. It's debatable whether it is a truth. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Can you have the superior intellect without letting it turn you into something like Khan? That's kind of the question, and you know, a question worth exploring and discovering. So. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, everybody, thanks a lot for watching Ask the Trexperts. Let us know in the comments what you think about Space Seed. I know we talked for quite a while. It's a big episode. There's a lot to say. And we'll be back with you hopefully really soon with our Wrath of Khan commentary. It's just going to depend on our schedules whether or not that happens before a new episode of Ask the Trexperts, but we're going to really try in the next couple of weeks. So anyway, once again, thanks for watching. We bid you farewell. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Sarah.
And we'll see you next time.